Hi everyone, and welcome to the lecture on flow, achievement, and addiction. So flow doesn't sound like a theory or a body of research. Out of context, the word doesn't necessarily give you the information about what it's implying, but it's a precise theory about a very important aspect of human functioning. And it's a body of research where autotelic activity, autotelic meaning it's an activity that's gratifying to do, is a primary focus. We link flow to mindfulness, but what's most important is memorizing the important features of flow. The feeling that you're using high levels of skill and the feeling that you're engaged in a highly challenging situation. So it's a high skill and a high challenge experience together. I'm sure a lot of people have had those moments when, maybe you're playing a musical instrument or doing a hobby, playing a video game, and your attention just kind of zones in, and your your focus feels perfect. It feels easy. You're experiencing mastery. It's an incredibly satisfying experience when you can enter a flow state, and you can really notice when you come out of it as well, and that whole experience. So it's key for the flow state to achieve a balance between the challenge and the skill level. For example, if you're experiencing a very high challenge, but you lack the skills to keep up with it, it induces anxiety, worry. If you have the skill and the challenge level is low, you can be relaxed, you can sort of coast through it. And but you don't really have the difficulty to engage the flow state. You never really, hit the zone when if you're doing something that's too boring. There's not really an opportunity to succeed or fail. That that key match of challenge to skill is what defines the flow state. So, how do we understand flow? Flow is an experience where you're in a high challenge, your high level skills are being applied, there's high arousal, like you're fully alert, you're fully engaged, and there's a sense of control and mastery as a result of this. And an experience that can be stimulating and gratifying is one that we want to measure. So in doing so, we start with the originator's 9 characteristics. It's easier to memorize these 9 features in this model than than the author's name, which is a little easier. Phonetically, the name is pronounced Csikszentmihalyi. Csikszentmihalyi, to stretch out the syllables, but that's the name of the person we'll be talking about. So memorizing these 9 features is important because this concept is very useful in health psychology. These 9 characteristics are undoubtedly critical information, and you should look for these to be on the exam. You should make sure that you memorize and completely understand this section. Okay? Take as much time as you need to go back and forth across this. They're not too hard to understand. The one that tends to be a little less intuitive perhaps is the loss of self-consciousness. So let's just go through these one by one. So first of all, we've already talked about the challenge skill balance, that you're feeling competent to meet the high demands of the situation. There's an action and awareness merge. So you're doing spontaneously without having to think. Imagine, snowboarding down a mountain and finding the perfect run that every movement is hitting exactly where you need it to be. You're not thinking ahead, you just react in the moment and you achieve your clear goals. So you know what you're trying to do and you do it, and you don't have to overtly think through the stages involved in doing each of these. There's unambiguous feedback, so you immediately see how well you're doing during the performance. Again, say this snowboarding example, you're not falling down, you're not deviating from the path that you're going to, you're following your vision successfully. Your complete task focus, your mind is sort of subsumed in what it is that you're doing. and there's no, stray thoughts about, did you take out the garbage or did you leave the stove on? It's complete task focus, a sense of control over what you're doing. Again, this is related to some of the other attributes, that you have your objective and you're successfully hitting all of the steps progressing towards it. The loss of self-consciousness. So imagine ways in which you have felt painfully self-conscious. Maybe you're at a party and you don't really know people, and so you have a quiet moment and all of your focus is on the experience of your self-consciousness, of this is awkward, or just thinking about how you're presenting yourself, and etc. This is the opposite of that. You're fully immersed in the task that you're doing, and there's no self-consciousness impeding your experience, and you're right on top of what's happening. There's a transformation of time where time kind of passes differently. You zone in, you complete the task, whether it's, again, this snowboarding run, maybe you beat a video game level or play a song flawlessly, and you kind of come out of it at the end. There's a distinct feeling of coming up from the experience and feeling reward, this autotelic experience, the satisfaction of both knowing that it was a challenging task and a challenging task that you've done the way that you wanted to do. Maybe you stumbled in some way, but generally the point is that you're out of it, and it's satisfying. You know that you've done what it is that you wanted to accomplish. So we can measure these characteristics by creating a questionnaire that asks a participant whether they're experiencing these characteristics at a given point in time and to what degree. So this is the flow state questionnaire. You don't have to memorize all these questions, just know that it exists, and it's called a psychometric questionnaire because by using it we create flow scores, numeric flow scores, that represent how much a person is experiencing flow. And these numbers are created in a way that's consistent, so they can be compared from person to person or from a single person across multiple flow experiences. Now, all you have to worry about for this slide and the next one is that flow is a regulatory experience. So it's a combination of experiences, none of which are at extreme levels. There is exertion, discomfort, and technique, but it's a combination of all of them, and there's no single dominant feature. Too much of any one particular feature, and there's no flow. The same is true for emotional states of flow. Combines pleasantness, unpleasantness, anxiety, boredom, but the combination of those attributes is what matters more than any single feature. You can have a relaxing experience at home, watching Netflix by yourself, and be on the axis of boredom. It's not intense, there's no challenge. And you could compare that to perhaps a flow experience at a party where there's a certain level of anxiety associated with dealing with a group of people, maybe some people that you don't know, and there is an emotional groove that you can get into. Maybe you're very relaxed, you're telling funny anecdotes, and the challenges of that social situation are being matched equally with what you're able to put into it. And so that state of emotional flow is maybe an experience that would resonate for you as well. We can't ignore the similarity between the experience of flow and the religious experiences that people can have, but we're clearly working on the science side of this, trying to make religion less blind. You don't have to memorize this quote, but this is kind of a key question for this course, and for really any skill or course or training that you're trying to learn. Which is, can you experience flow and be gratified and enjoy that experience of success and achieve at the same time? So Malcolm Gladwell, which I'm sure you've heard of his work, is the one who popularized this theory about it takes 10,000 hours of practice to master a skill. And it challenges us with the idea that if we do something we like to do and we do it a lot, it can become a very valuable skill. So whether it's just for in terms of the production of the skill or in terms of the value of the experience. So in some of his work, they found comparisons of expert meditators, expert musicians who began playing at about 5 years of age with similar amounts of time dedicated to practice. Then, by the time they reached around 8 years old, their practice habits diverged. So, some participants would study more hours, some would study less. By 20 years from the start of that study, the elite performers averaged about 10,000 hours of work. So this is by 20 years of practice, where the people who were less able averaged about 4,000 hours or less over that period. And this divergence of hours, at some point there's this continuum of gradual improvement that without a defined threshold results in people achieving a level of mastery and reaching these higher levels of flow states during this type of task. This is just a graph showing the age of these pianists and the number of accumulated hours of practice. You can see there is a tremendous amount of dedication required to reach these levels. And the way that this adds up, obviously there's a certain part of your life when the parents are really the ones responsible for coordinating the schedule, and through childhood, the people who are able to stick with their practice schedule. Early teenage years, there tends to be a drop off for obvious reasons. And then after that, the people who are gravitating towards maintaining this skill and continuing to develop it return to a more intense practice schedule. So this just represents one musician that we know. Now these next slides are related to advanced meditators, so people who have accumulated 10,000 or more hours of lifetime meditation experience. So first we can see these are their EEG results and how they enter gamma wave states within seconds of beginning the meditation process under monitoring with the EEG cap. So very quickly, the level of discipline that they have allows them to enter this deeper meditative state upon beginning the meditation process. So this chart is showing some further details of this. So you can see at the bottom there the number of seconds that have passed during the start of this meditation session, and how within less than 1 minute these meditators are able to generate this pattern of high gamma activity. For reference, this is a member of our lab who has a substantial number of practice hours, obviously less than the lifetime meditators in the other study, but significant experience. And so what we can see here is the increase in gamma power, which is the amount of brain actively generating gamma wave activity, as the meditation continued for a 45-minute period. One thing that's of particular interest with the advanced meditators is that their self-evaluation of the meditative process is actually remarkably accurate and reflective of what we see in the EEG recordings of the gamma waves. So their own perception verbally of how much clarity they were achieving during the meditative process is described by this red line here. And this is really surprisingly reflective of the actual gamma activity. So they have successfully monitored their own brain output using purely internal processes. So it's clearly a skill that the advanced practice and the lifetime of experience required to get to this level has given these practitioners fairly advanced insight into the operation of their own mind. Now we're going to pivot at this point to talk about flow in music making. So how is flow experienced in music making? We know that flow is experienced in both production and listening to music. So perhaps the experience of musicians is a good context for understanding how flow affects people, and particularly how the flow experience might predict achievement in people. So this 2013 study looked at 76 piano performance students using self-report measures for flow and self-reports about trait emotional intelligence as well. In order to assess trait emotional intelligence, there was a questionnaire used. There's a variety of statements with these 7-point response scales ranging from completely disagree to completely agree. So trait emotional intelligence sounds and looks like a description of a sort of idealized person, but in many ways it also reflects a person who is in the midst of a state of flow. It may be that being in a state of flow reinforces our best characteristics, and that might illustrate a possible connection between EI, emotional intelligence, and flow. Now, you don't have to memorize these list of characteristics, but we're just repeating them to make sure you understand why there might be a connection between flow and EI. So if there is a connection there, that might mean that people are better able to experience flow when manifesting their emotional intelligence, and people might be better able to manifest flow when they're in a condition of having high emotional intelligence. So the 14 characteristics of EI. There's adaptability, assertiveness, emotional perceptions, emotional expression, and those meaning adaptability, flexibility, and willingness to adapt to new conditions. Assertiveness, being clear, forthright, frank, willing to stand up for your rights, for yourself, for others. Emotional perceptions, being clear and about what you and what others are feeling, and emotional expression, being capable of communicating those feelings to others. There's also emotional management, where you're capable of influencing other people's feelings. Emotional regulation, where you're capable of controlling and regulating your own emotions. Low impulsiveness, so being reflective, more pensive, less likely to give in to urges and do things on a whim. And relationships, being capable of having a fulfilling personal relationship. Just a few more of these traits. So self-esteem is a pretty widely known, being successfully self-confident and being comfortable with yourself. Self-motivation, being driven, unlikely to give up in the face of adversity. And social awareness, being an accomplished networker with excellent social skills. Stress management, being able to withstand pressure and regulate or manage your own stress levels. Trait empathy, where you can understand someone else's perspective meaningfully. Trait happiness, someone who's cheerful and satisfied with life. And trait optimism, someone who looks on the bright side of life. Okay, so we're going to quickly return to the characteristics of flow. We're going to run through these quickly. You may want to look at these after listening to the lecture. Just compare them side by side and see what kind of parallels you can see. So again, for flow, there's the challenge skill balance, the action awareness merge, clear goals, unambiguous feedback, concentration on the task at hand, a sense of control or mastery over what you're doing, a loss of self-consciousness, so not worrying about what other people are thinking of you, getting immersed in the task, transformation of time, and an autotelic experience, the rewarding, the sense of satisfaction upon finishing the activity. And this is again an overview of the flow state questionnaire for comparison. So take a look, take a minute to read through this and see where you can see the similarities. So researchers undertake qualitative studies using interview questions and ask for responses from participants in a narrative format. People tell their stories. And these kind of studies give details of people's lived experiences that can help us better understand links between key concepts and details of these experiences in a way that can't really be derived with questionnaires alone. So these studies can give details about the experience of flow that help us to understand them and help people achieve that state more effectively. So some of the questions for you to think about when reviewing the study and studying. Do you think that there is a relationship between musical emotions and flow? You can think about these as you're reading through the article as well. Do you personally experience happiness and enjoyment while in a flow state? You know, if you play piano or a different musical instrument. These are the ones that were asked of the participants, but you can think about these for yourself and compare it to your own experience. You can read through the rest of these questions here. And on the next slide, they continue. So these are very specific to this particular group, but as a thought experiment for yourself, I encourage you to go through them. So this is a different study. The overall goal was to predict flow experience during piano playing. There were two hypothesized predictor variables. One was the daily amount of practice, and the second was trait emotional intelligence. And these predictor variables were entered as quantitative variables into a regression analysis, which, if you think back to the basin analogy with the liquid in the basin as being variance, and the variables are the sponges that soak up the fluid. So the more of the fluid that gets picked up by the sponges, the more that predictor predicts variability in the outcome. So in this case, the variability in the outcome using these two predictors, practice and emotional intelligence, predicted about 27% of the variance in the flow experience, meaning about a quarter of the variability of flow scores was predicted by daily practice and trait emotional intelligence. So the further question prompted by this was whether flow experience was itself a predictor of high achievement. So to test this, they used a dichotomous outcome variable, which was either winning or not winning a major piano competition. And the two key variables used were the daily amount of practice and the age of first practice. And combined, these two variables predicted almost 75% of prize winners. So this result might seem to be a bit of a letdown, considering the main hypothesis or the objective of the study was to validate flow and trait emotional intelligence as essential elements of personal success. But this doesn't so much disprove those hypotheses as much as it demonstrates the practical element of practice, meaning daily quantity of hours and the age of initial practice, is a stronger predictor of success. So in the end, flow may make accumulating more practice hours more satisfying and more rewarding, but it's the actual total accumulation that apparently makes the most difference. And if you think about it, the practice and the skill, the mastery, is necessary to achieve the optimal flow state, but the optimal flow state doesn't grant the benefits of all those years of experience. So it's worth considering the relationship of these two factors. So this is just one more quick review of the characteristics of flow to remind ourselves what we're focusing on in terms of understanding the benefits of this practice hours and achievement. So there are some of these that are more salient than others. For example, this action awareness merge, the doing spontaneously without having to think. When someone's fully immersed in a performance, a piece of music, and not having to think about turning the page, not having to think about what passages are coming up next, just hitting every target that they set for themselves as they play their way through the piece without stumbling. So you can see how many of these flow characteristics are going to be relevant to this kind of high-level musical practice. So while we are considering flow as a positive characteristic, a positive experience during this musical practice, flow states can also be achieved during less helpful, more maladaptive behaviors. It makes sense in this case to examine it in the context of some psychological forms of addiction, especially those represented in high levels of video game addiction. There appears to be some relationship, as shown in this study, where video game characteristics, happiness, and flow were together predictors of addiction amongst video game players. And this perhaps shows that we can experience flow when playing video games. So this study recruited participants through advertising in some online gaming forums, a majority male, some female population with a mean age of just under 25 years of age. They had, on average, been playing video games for over a decade, more than half their lifetime for many of these people. And participants played for an average of about 9.2 hours per week. And almost 80 different video games were represented in the sample, with the most common game being played was Call of Duty Modern Warfare, which gives you an idea when this research was conducted. So of the 110 participants, 66 of them played video games alone, and about 42 of them played multiplayer modes. They completed a variety of questionnaires: a video game features questionnaire, the flow state scale that we've discussed, a game addiction scale, and an Oxford happiness questionnaire, assessing their perceived level of happiness globally. A multiple linear regression, again the basin sponge analogy, evaluated whether or not flow, the Oxford Happiness Questionnaire, and 5 main structural gaming characteristics were predictors of variance in the respondents' game addiction scores. So if the game addiction score was higher, then that represented a greater level of addiction. And the focus of this study was to investigate how much the flow state was a predictor of addiction, and even a form of happy or satisfied addiction, as could be represented by the Oxford Happiness Questionnaire. So the game addiction scale, GAS, was significantly and positively correlated with 3 of the flow characteristics, meaning the merging of actions, the awareness of oneself, and the distorted sense of time. So there is some kind of relationship. And in fact, there was an inverse correlation between general happiness levels and game addiction experiences, which is very reasonable if you think that you're self-reporting that you feel like you're addicted, you're less likely to feel in control, less likely to feel happy. And the autotelic, again, the satisfaction experience of playing a video game, was weakly but significantly correlated, that had manipulation control, narrative identity, and reward features. And you can look further into the definition of these if you read the article on Moodle. That said, there were significant positive correlations between the flow experience of merging action and awareness of self with features of the game. So that's, really getting into it, getting lost in the game, as well as those games that used social features and reward features. We know that these are carefully designed to encourage a maintenance of play and continuation, whether that's an achievement system, social networking features through Facebook or other game networks, Steam platforms, etc. And so there are multiple ways in which these games can attract and maintain attention from people playing them. So part of what I think is very interesting about this study is that there is this inverse correlation between happiness and the addiction scores, which suggests that this addiction is partly fueled by withdrawal from situations where they may have less control in their daily life. So thinking of a person who is perhaps suffering from anxiety or depression or whatever other forces are leading them towards this type of addictive process. Games can be a refuge. There are positive features of games where, if you lose at a level, you could reload and try again. If you lose in a multiplayer game, you can just queue up for another match. There is an immediate opportunity to do better and to learn from your mistakes and incrementally improve in a way that is somewhat inherently logical. It's clear. You could look up a guide online, you can practice with friends, and the fact that it's a video game itself, hopefully you're having fun if you're playing video games. Otherwise, you could do something more interesting with your time. But the fact that it's this kind of controlled environment where people who may be in these addictive cycles might not have a lot of other opportunities to feel that sense of mastery and success in daily life. And so this can be sort of a safe refuge for people in this pattern. So just to wrap this up, uh, this is the key relationship between motivation and achievement. And it's represented here in the challenge achievement learning model. And the key variables here are challenge expectancy and achievement expectancy. So that is to say, the challenge is the assessment of the difficulty of challenges that you're about to confront, and the achievement expectancy is where your confidence or your expectation about being able to achieve it is represented. So you have an idea of how hard this task is going to be, and you have an idea about how well placed, how likely you are to succeed at it. And when there is a meaningful and a balanced relationship between the two, then we can sustain attention, which is the attention regulation, and we can find motivation. If you feel that the task is too easy, it's hard to be excited and focused. And if you feel that the task is too hard and you're not likely to succeed, that's likely to lead to the same situation. So again, this is another way of seeing that relationship with flow, where high challenge and high feelings of competency, meaning which leads to the high feeling of a probability of success, are combined. So that's it for this lecture. If you have any questions, feel free to post on Moodle, and hopefully people from the class will be able to help you out, and we're always available by email. Take care.